Subhas Chandra Bose, A Revolutionary Life. Part 1. Origins and Early Education. 1897. 1913. Subhas Chandra Bose was born on 23 January 1897 in the city of Cuttack, then part of the Bengal Presidency under British India, in what is now the state of Odisha. He hailed from a prominent and well-established Bengali family. His father, Janakanath Bose, was a successful lawyer and government pleader, known for his adherence to legal precision and unwavering loyalty to the British colonial administration. Janakinath, a self-made man from the outskirts of Calcutta, had risen through perseverance and intellect. Despite his deep involvement in professional duties, he stayed connected to his roots, frequently returning to his ancestral village during religious festivals. Subhas's mother, Prabhabati Bose, affectionately called Ma Janani by her children, was the spiritual and emotional anchor of the Bose household. She gave birth to 14 children, of whom Subhas was the 9th and 6th son. A devout Hindu, Prabhabati instilled in her children the values of duty, discipline, and faith. The Bose home was deeply traditional in its values, with Bengali being the primary language spoken and religious practices woven into daily life. The young Subhas absorbed mythological tales from the epics, listened to devotional songs, and grew up surrounded by a culture that valued both intellectual and spiritual development. Subhas's early schooling began at the Protestant European School in Cuttack, managed by the Baptist Mission. Established for European and Anglo-Indian children, the school followed a strictly British curriculum. Subhas was admitted at the age of 5 in January 1902, following the academic path set by his older brothers. His father's primary motivation for enrolling him in a European school was to ensure his sons mastered the English language with native proficiency, seen as a ticket to influence and opportunity under British rule. The young Bose received instruction in English, Latin, the Bible, British geography and history, and good manners. Indian subjects, languages, and cultural narratives were conspicuously absent from the syllabus. This made the contrast between home and school stark. For Subhas, at school he was immersed in British norms, while at home he was grounded in Bengali traditions and Hindu spirituality. Despite this duality, Subhas adapted quickly and developed a strong academic record. However, his deeply reflective nature and philosophical inclination began to emerge during these formative years. He felt a certain emotional distance from his father, whose stoic demeanor and busy schedule often kept him away from family interactions. His mother, on the other hand, was a nurturing presence, providing warmth and guidance. In 1909, Subhas moved on to the Ravenshaw Collegiate School, continuing a pattern set by his older brothers. This school, unlike his previous one, included Indian languages like Bengali and Sanskrit, and introduced elements of Indian religious and philosophical thought. Here, he encountered the spiritual teachings of Hindu scriptures, such as the Vedas and Upanishads. These early exposures sowed the seeds of religious introspection and nationalistic fervor. During this period, Bose became deeply influenced by the teachings of Swami Vivekananda and the mystic Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. His letters to his mother began to reflect not just intellectual curiosity, but a quest for spiritual identity. He also encountered the novel Ananda Math by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, which fueled his early fascination with patriotic ideals and heroic self-sacrifice. Though absorbed in metaphysical inquiries, Bose remained a capable and competitive student, achieving the second position in the matriculation exams of the University of Calcutta in 1912. His academic excellence earned him a place at Presidency College in Calcutta in 1913, a prestigious institution primarily attended by the elite of Bengal's upper caste Hindu society. He chose to study philosophy, focusing on Western thinkers like Kant, Hegel, and Bergson. There, he also formed a deep and spiritual friendship with Hemanta Kumar Sarkar, a fellow student and kindred soul in their shared passion for religious and philosophical ideals. In 1914, the two friends embarked on a pilgrimage across northern India during their summer break, in search of a spiritual master or guru. The journey, kept secret from Subhas's family, ended in disappointment when the hoped-for guru proved elusive. Bose fell ill with typhoid during the trip and was forced to return home, leading to significant distress within his family. The situation was only calmed by the intervention of his elder brother, Subhas Chandra Bose, who had returned from his law studies in England. After recovering, Subhas resumed his studies and became actively involved in student journalism and debating societies. However, an incident in February 1916 drastically altered the trajectory of his academic life. Bose was accused of participating in an attack on Professor E.F. Outen of the History Department, following allegations that the professor had made disparaging remarks about Indian students. Although Professor Outen was not seriously harmed and could not identify his attackers, testimony from a college servant implicated Bose and his classmate Ananga Dam. As a result, both were expelled from Presidency College and barred from the University of Calcutta. This expulsion caused a significant scandal and brought immense shame and sorrow to the Bose family. Despite efforts by family connections to appeal the decision, the expulsion remained in place for over a year. Eventually, in July 1917, the university allowed him to resume his studies at another institution. Subhas joined Scottish Church College, where he earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy with first-class honors in 1918, ranking second in his class. This phase of Subhas Chandra Bose's life laid the foundation for his future as a nationalist. He had faced both academic recognition and institutional rejection, grown intellectually and spiritually, and begun to question the colonial structure into which he had been born. His father, still hopeful of a conventional career for his son, urged him to sit for the Indian Civil Service, ICS, examination a prestigious gateway into the colonial bureaucracy. Subhas agreed, setting the stage for a journey that would transform him from a gifted student into a committed revolutionary. Part 2. From Civil Service Aspirant to Nationalist Firebrand. 1919. 1921. Subhas Chandra Bose's decision to prepare for the Indian Civil Service, ICS, was both a concession to his father's ambitions and a calculated move of his own. Janakinath Bose, loyal to the British administration and deeply invested in his son's future, saw the ICS as the most prestigious and stable career path for a talented young Indian. Subhas, though already troubled by the idea of serving the colonial regime, agreed to undertake the journey to England, perhaps out of filial duty or a desire to explore possibilities before making up his mind. Arriving in London on 20 October 1919, Subhas plunged into preparations for the competitive ICS examination. His references were impeccable. He listed Lord Sinha of Raipur, a senior Indian statesman and under Secretary of State for India, and Bhupendranath Basu, a respected lawyer and Council of India member. His academic credentials were already recognized, but for admission to Cambridge, he had missed the formal deadlines. Fortunately, the Non-Collegiate Students Board offered him a route into the university without affiliation to a specific college. Subhas thus enrolled in the University of Cambridge on 19 November 1919, selecting the Mental and Moral Sciences Tripos, an appropriate continuation of his earlier studies in philosophy. The ICS exam was rigorous, requiring candidates to pass written and oral examinations on a broad array of subjects. In August 1920, Bose sat for the competitive exam and achieved an impressive fourth-place ranking among the 6 candidates selected. This success was an affirmation of his intellectual brilliance and discipline. Yet, the ICS was not merely a professional goal. It was increasingly becoming a moral dilemma. In parallel to his academic obligations, Subhas began to immerse himself in the political and ideological currents of post-World War I Britain. He attended lectures, met with students and political figures, and engaged in vigorous discussions about India's future. British Labour Party politicians and Indian nationalists in exile opened new avenues of thought. The questions that had haunted him in his student years in Calcutta about national identity, colonial injustice, and moral duty grew sharper in the intellectually charged environment of Cambridge and London. Despite the bright prospects before him, doubts began to take root. Letters exchanged between Subhas and his elder brother, Subhas Chandra Bose, reveal the inner turmoil he experienced. Subhas questioned whether serving the British Raj, even in a prestigious role like the ICS, was compatible with his growing nationalist convictions. In one letter, he reflected, "For a man of my temperament, who has been feeding on ideas that might be called eccentric, the line of least resistance is not the best line to follow." These were not the casual musings of a restless youth, but the serious deliberations of a man on the brink of a dramatic life choice. He wrote to his brother, expressing disillusionment with the idea of imperial service. It is not possible to serve one's country in the best and fullest manner if one is chained on to the civil service. The idea of compromising with colonialism, no matter how honorable the post, was becoming intolerable. Subhas also began to seek ideological alignment. In England, he observed firsthand both the strengths and hypocrisies of British society. He admired their orderliness, discipline, and commitment to institutions. But he also saw the double standard. The same British Empire that celebrated liberty and justice at home maintained a cruelly repressive regime in India. These observations only deepened his conviction that true national freedom required radical sacrifice. His internal struggle reached a conclusion in early 1921. Despite having passed the competitive exam and facing only the final interview and practical assessments, he decided not to pursue the ICS any further. On 22 April 1921, he wrote to Edwin Montagu, the Secretary of State for India, requesting that his name be removed from the list of ICS probationers. The next day, he informed Sarrett of his decision in a heartfelt letter, adding, "I received a letter from Mother saying that, in spite of what Father and others think she prefers the ideals for which Mahatma Gandhi stands, it will be worth a treasure for me." His mother's quiet endorsement of Gandhian ideals was a turning point. Her support gave him emotional reassurance and helped bridge the generational chasm between his ideals and the expectations of his father. Subhas's heart was no longer in civil service but in serving India through struggle and sacrifice. Before departing England, he took the final Cambridge examinations for his B.A., but with little enthusiasm. He passed with third-class honors, a rare underperformance for someone of his capability. This underachievement perhaps reflected his preoccupation with India's political situation and the urgency he felt to contribute to the nationalist movement. Instead of collecting his diploma himself, he entrusted another student with the task and prepared to return to India. In June 1921, Subhas Bose sailed back to India, leaving behind not just a promising bureaucratic career but also a life of personal comfort, academic prestige, and imperial privilege. He returned with a sharpened sense of purpose and a resolve to throw himself into the independence movement. His first act upon arrival was to seek a meeting with Mahatma Gandhi. By then, Gandhi had emerged as the spiritual and political leader of India's non-cooperation movement, a campaign that had electrified the nation and captured the imagination of millions. Subhas, now 24, met Gandhi in Bombay on the day he landed, eager to understand the strategy and vision behind the movement. The meeting would prove momentous, not for its harmony, but for the disagreements it revealed. In Subhas's later account, he questioned Gandhi relentlessly. He found Gandhi's responses vague, his strategies insufficient, and his insistence on non-violence rigid. The two men, though united in purpose, differed vastly in philosophy. Bose believed that any means violent or non-violent could be justified in pursuit of independence. Gandhi, by contrast, saw the method as inseparable from the goal. Nevertheless, Gandhi directed Bose to Chittaranjan Das, a respected leader in Bengal who was more aligned with the radical stream of nationalism. Das welcomed Bose warmly and recognized his potential. Thus began Subhas Chandra Bose's active political life in India, one that would see him rise rapidly through the ranks of the Indian National Congress and eventually challenge the very foundations of colonial rule. By the time he set foot back on Indian soil, Subhas had already chosen the path of revolution over reconciliation. The boy from Cuttack, who had once aspired to wear the mantle of an ICS officer, was now a committed revolutionary, ready to devote his life to India's liberation. Part 3. Rising through the ranks. Bose in the Indian National Congress, 1921, 1932. After turning his back on the Indian civil service in 1921, Subhas Chandra Bose plunged headfirst into the political whirlpool of colonial India. With guidance from Chittaranjan Das, popularly known as Deshbandhu, friend of the nation, Bose found not only a political mentor but a visionary who shared his skepticism of British promises and supported a more confrontational stance in the nationalist movement. It was Das who gave Subhas his first practical political responsibilities and introduced him to the intricacies of Indian National Congress (INC) politics. Under Das's tutelage, Bose quickly rose to prominence within the Bengal Provincial Congress Committee. His first major political assignment was as the editor of Forward, a nationalist newspaper that served as a mouthpiece for anti-British sentiment in Bengal. His editorials were sharp, impassioned, and intellectually rich. He used the platform to criticize colonial policies, praise acts of civil disobedience, and advocate for complete independence, an idea still considered too radical by many within the Congress. That same year, Bose founded his own publication, Swaraj, Self-Rule, where he further articulated his ideas on nationalism and India's path forward. Even in his early writings, a distinct voice emerged, clear, disciplined, forceful, and uncompromising in its demand for liberty. Through the power of the written word, Bose solidified his status as one of the most dynamic young leaders in the freedom movement. In 1923, Bose's organizational talents and ideological clarity earned him national recognition. He was elected president of the Indian Youth Congress and appointed secretary of the Bengal State Congress. These roles offered him a broader platform to influence public opinion and rally youth to the cause of freedom. The same year, Chittaranjan Das was elected mayor of Calcutta, and Bose was appointed chief executive officer of the Calcutta Municipal Corporation. At just 26 years old, Bose had become a powerful civic administrator and an emerging national voice. As CEO, Bose implemented progressive administrative reforms aimed at improving sanitation, urban infrastructure, and the functioning of public institutions. His tenure was marked by a commitment to efficiency, transparency, and public service. Despite British interference and systemic limitations, he used his role to demonstrate how Indians could govern their own cities and eventually their nation. But the British government had begun to notice the growing influence of Subhas Chandra Bose. In 1924, during a protest rally in Calcutta against colonial policies, Bose and several other leaders were arrested. While the charges were largely political and aimed at suppressing dissent, the arrest had a chilling effect on the nationalist movement in Bengal. Then, in 1925, 925. Bose was imprisoned again. This time under more serious pretexts of sedition and suspected involvement in revolutionary activities. He was transported to Mandalay in British Burma, a remote prison far from his family and political allies. The harsh conditions of confinement and the tropical climate took a toll on his health. It was during this imprisonment that Bose contracted tuberculosis, a disease that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Yet, far from breaking his spirit, the Mandalay years only deepened his resolve. He immersed himself in study, wrote extensively, and reflected on the political future of India. It was also during this period that his thoughts began to evolve toward the necessity of strong, centralized leadership ideas that would later bring him into conflict with more moderate Congress leaders. After his release in 1927, Bose returned to political life with renewed vigor. He was elected General Secretary of the Congress Party and forged a close working relationship with Jawaharlal Nehru, another rising star in Indian politics. Though the two shared socialist leanings and deep patriotism, their methods and visions for India's future would later diverge. For the moment, they represented a younger, more radical generation within the Congress that sought to push the party beyond petitions and resolutions. In late December 1928, Bose played a central role in organizing the annual session of the Indian National Congress in Calcutta. He was appointed General Officer Commanding, GOC, of the Congress Volunteer Corps, a group he turned into a quasi-military body, complete with uniforms, ranks, and drills. The decision to militarize the volunteers alarmed many senior Congress leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi, who famously described the session as a Bertram Mills circus, mocking its regimented spectacle. But for Bose and his supporters, the uniformed corps symbolized discipline, commitment, and readiness for direct action. His vision of nationalism was not one of passive resistance alone. It required preparation, sacrifice, and confrontation. Bose believed that India needed not just political mobilization, but a disciplined, militant force to assert its rights on the world stage. This dual identity as a disciplined public servant and a passionate revolutionary was central to Bose's political style. He could transition fluidly between the corridors of civic administration and the streets of protest. As mayor of Calcutta in 1930, he once again demonstrated administrative prowess while continuing to confront the colonial government head-on. His leadership and rising popularity did not go unnoticed. In the early 1930s, he was repeatedly imprisoned for his role in civil disobedience campaigns. The British viewed him as a threat. His ability to mobilize the youth, articulate a coherent nationalist ideology, and challenge the authority of even the Congress High Command made him unpredictable and dangerous in their eyes. From 1931 to 1933, he faced repeated incarcerations and restrictions, including being placed under house arrest. Despite his poor health worsened by his previous bout with tuberculosis, Bose used these enforced periods of isolation to read, write, and refine his vision for India's future. It was during this period that he began conceptualizing a stronger, more centralized Indian state that could resist foreign domination and accelerate social reforms. In 1932, after his release, Bose decided to travel to Europe, ostensibly for medical treatment and recuperation. But the journey would become much more than a convalescence retreat. It marked the beginning of a new phase in his political evolution, one in which he would engage with the ideological battlegrounds of fascism, socialism, and imperialism on the global stage. His meteoric rise within the Indian National Congress had brought him national acclaim but also tension with the old guard. Gandhi, Nehru, and others respected his zeal but worried about his increasingly radical methods. Nevertheless, by the end of this period, Subhas Chandra Bose had firmly established himself as one of the most charismatic and influential leaders of the Indian freedom movement, revered by the youth, feared by the British, and increasingly ready to chart his own course. Part 4. European Sojourn, Illness, Ideology, and a Secret Marriage. 1933. 1937. By the early 1930s, Subhas Chandra Bose was a prominent figure in the Indian nationalist movement. His confrontations with colonial authorities had taken a toll, particularly on his health. Following years of imprisonment and poor prison conditions, Bose suffered severely from tuberculosis. Doctors advised him to leave India for treatment and recuperation. With reluctance but necessity, he left for Europe in 1933, a decision that would significantly influence both his personal life and political ideology. Initially, Bose traveled to Vienna, Austria, seeking medical attention at the Alpine health resorts and clinics popular among Europeans for pulmonary illnesses. Though physically weakened, his intellectual spirit remained undiminished. During these years, Bose began work on his political treatise, The Indian Struggle, a book that would chronicle the years of India's freedom movement from 1920 to 1934 and outline his views on the nation's political future. In Europe, Bose used his relative anonymity to interact freely with students, intellectuals, and political leaders. He attended conferences, visited universities, and met Indian expatriates across the continent. His interactions were wide-ranging, from Indian students in Berlin and London to diplomats and intellectuals in Paris and Rome. He also took a keen interest in the developments of both left and right-wing politics in Europe, especially in Germany and Italy, where fascism was reshaping the political landscape. Bose's encounters with authoritarian regimes were not without ambivalence. He admired the discipline, unity, and decisiveness of fascist states, especially in contrast to what he saw as the inefficiencies of liberal democracies. He believed that a newly independent India would require a period of authoritarian leadership to rebuild and modernize. His enthusiasm, however, was largely ideological and practical. He was not a fascist in the racial or totalitarian sense, and he remained deeply rooted in India's pluralistic and spiritual traditions. Still, his public admiration for the achievements of Mussolini and the centralization of power under fascist regimes raised eyebrows, particularly among his Congress colleagues. In a speech delivered in Berlin, Bose suggested that India needed a synthesis of modern Western methods and ancient Indian values. He praised the economic progress of Soviet Russia and the nationalist revival in Italy. But above all, he sought an Indian path, one that borrowed effective governance tools from abroad while remaining uniquely Indian in spirit. It was during this European chapter that Bose met Emily Schenkel, an Austrian woman who would later become his life partner. Their relationship developed quietly, away from public attention, amid the backdrop of Bose's health treatments and political travels. Emily, a secretary by profession, met Bose while assisting him in typing and editing The Indian Struggle. Over time, their professional partnership blossomed into a personal bond. Despite cultural and religious differences, Emily and Subhas found companionship in each other. Their relationship, however, remained largely clandestine, shaped by the political realities of Bose's life and the constraints of Indian society at the time. The two reportedly married in secret, possibly through a Hindu ceremony, though this has remained a subject of debate due to the absence of formal documentation. They had a daughter, Anita Bose Pfaff, born in November 1942, years after Bose had already launched his international campaign for Indian independence. Throughout the mid-1930s, Bose continued to campaign internationally for India's cause. In London, he sought meetings with British political leaders, especially those in the Labour Party. He found sympathetic ears in men like Clement Attlee and Harold Lasky, who admired his intellect and commitment. However, attempts to meet conservative leaders were consistently rebuffed. The British establishment saw Bose as too radical, too disruptive, and too eager to provoke conflict rather than negotiate gradual reform. Back in India, Bose's political star continued to rise, even from afar. His criticisms of the British Empire, his calls for complete independence, Purna Swaraj, and his emphasis on socialist planning struck a chord with the younger generation. He was increasingly seen as the bold alternative to the more cautious strategies of Gandhi and the Congress Old Guard. In 1935, Bose published The Indian Struggle in London. The book was quickly banned in British India due to its bold condemnation of colonial repression and its support for radical nationalism. Ironically, the ban only increased its influence. Copies were smuggled into India and circulated among politically active youth, further cementing Bose's status as a leader of the revolutionary stream within Indian nationalism. As he recuperated in the alpine town of Bad Gastein, Austria, Bose continued to engage with nationalist politics from a distance. He kept in touch with his brother Subhas Chandra Bose and other Congress leaders and monitored developments in India with growing concern. Despite his physical separation, he remained intellectually and emotionally invested in the movement. His letters to colleagues and family expressed frustration with what he saw as Gandhi's excessive reliance on nonviolence and the Congress's timidity in pressing for full independence. By 1937, Bose had recovered enough to contemplate a return to India. The political climate in India was shifting. The Indian National Congress had agreed to participate in provincial elections under the Government of India Act 1935, a controversial decision that marked a new phase of constitutional engagement with the British. Bose viewed this strategy as insufficient and was determined to push the Congress toward a more aggressive stance. Upon his return to India in early 1938, Bose was welcomed as a national hero. His long absence had only intensified public admiration. He was charismatic, eloquent, and fearless, a symbol of the kind of bold leadership many Indians felt the country desperately needed. With a broad base of support, he was elected President of the Indian National Congress at the Haripura session in 1938. This election marked a crucial turning point. For the first time, a radical nationalist with authoritarian leanings and an internationalist outlook stood at the helm of the Congress, a party still deeply influenced by Gandhi's principles of non-violence and moral restraint. The stage was now set for a dramatic confrontation between two fundamentally different visions of India's freedom struggle: Gandhi's spiritual and pacifist nationalism, and Bose's militant and pragmatic revolutionism. As Bose assumed leadership of the Congress, his ideas about governance, international alliances, and strategic resistance began to take center stage. The journey from a sick man recovering in the Alps to the president of India's largest political party was nothing short of remarkable. But the ideological battle lines had been drawn, and Bose would soon face his greatest political test. Part 5. Conflict and Confrontation. The Congress Presidency and Ideological Break, 1938-1940. By 1938, Subhas Chandra Bose had returned to India as a transformed man. His time in Europe, his political writings, and his extensive reading of socialist, fascist, and nationalist ideologies had shaped his vision of India's future. While still a loyal member of the Indian National Congress, Bose was increasingly convinced that the party needed to adopt a more aggressive, more centralized, and ideologically modern approach to winning independence. His ascension to the presidency of the Congress in 1938 at the Haripura session marked the beginning of a pivotal and contentious chapter in his political life. As Congress president, Bose put forward a vision that was both radical and urgent. He called for unqualified Swaraj, complete independence, and a strong, centrally planned economy modeled on socialist principles. Unlike the incremental constitutional reforms being discussed with the British under the 1935 Government of India Act, Bose believed in direct action and total self-reliance. He sought to mobilize not just political pressure, but also economic and social resources for national reconstruction after independence. In his presidential address at Haripura, Bose laid out a detailed roadmap for an independent India that included state ownership of key industries, land reform, national planning, and the abolition of poverty through industrial and agricultural modernization. His message was electrifying to many of India's youth, laborers, and the emerging intelligentsia, but it raised alarm among Congress conservatives and especially among those still committed to Mahatma Gandhi's strategy of nonviolent civil disobedience. Tensions escalated further in early 1939 when Bose stood for re-election to the Congress presidency. The old guard, including Gandhi, was deeply uncomfortable with Bose's leadership. Gandhi openly opposed his re-election, endorsing Pattabhi Sitaramaiah as his candidate. Yet, in a dramatic vote, Bose defeated Sitaramaiah, revealing a growing rift within the party and confirming Bose's popularity among the younger and more radical sections of the Congress. Despite his electoral victory, Bose's second term as president was marked by internal strife. Key members of the Congress Working Committee, most of them Gandhi loyalists, refused to cooperate with him. They objected to Bose's vision of using mass mobilization and even force, if necessary, to confront British rule. Gandhi himself remained polite but distant, unwilling to compromise on his principles of non-violence and spiritual leadership. The ideological schism between Gandhi's moral pacifism and Bose's pragmatic nationalism had become irreconcilable. Bose, ever a realist, understood that he could not effectively lead the Congress without the support of the party machinery. On 29 April 1939, just weeks after his re-election, he resigned from the presidency. It was a bitter moment, yet not a defeat. Bose remained determined to forge a new political path that could reconcile nationalism with socialism and enable a more militant resistance to colonial rule. Within weeks, Bose launched the All India Forward Bloc, a faction within the Congress designed to consolidate the leftist, anti-colonial elements of the party. Its goals were to create a united front of workers, peasants, students, and youth, to continue the struggle for complete independence. The Forward Bloc gained traction, particularly in Bengal and parts of southern India, where its message of urgency and revolution resonated deeply. Among Bose's most loyal supporters was U. Muthuramalingam Thevar, a prominent political leader from Tamil Nadu. Thevar played a critical role in galvanizing support for the Forward Bloc in southern India. When Bose visited Madurai in September 1939, Thevar organized a massive public reception that signaled growing grassroots momentum for the new political formation. Meanwhile, Bose's political ideas continued to evolve. In speeches and writings, he began articulating a case for what he termed authoritarian democracy. He believed that post-independence India would need strong, centralized governance to overcome poverty, social division, and the legacy of colonial exploitation. He often cited the examples of Kemal Ataturk in Turkey and Benito Mussolini in Italy as models of transformative leadership men who had rebuilt their nations through discipline, unity, and national pride. However, Bose's admiration for authoritarian leadership did not imply totalitarianism in the European mold. He envisioned an India that was industrialized, secular, and socially progressive. He supported women's empowerment, caste reform, and education. But he believed these transformations required coercive authority in the early years of independence, an idea that was deeply at odds with Gandhi's democratic and spiritual approach. The outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939 added new urgency to the political crisis in India. Without consulting Indian leaders, the Viceroy, Lord Linlithgow, unilaterally declared India at war with Germany. The Congress leadership protested the move and resigned from provincial ministries across the country. Bose saw this as a moment of strategic opportunity. Britain was at war and vulnerable. He advocated launching an immediate campaign of civil disobedience to pressure the British into granting full independence. However, his proposals were rejected by Gandhi and the Congress leadership, who were cautious about destabilizing India further during a global conflict. Frustrated and isolated within mainstream politics, Bose began organizing massive protests independently. One of his most provocative actions was a campaign to remove the Holwell Monument in Calcutta, which commemorated British deaths during the so-called Black Hole of Calcutta incident. To Bose, the monument symbolized imperial arrogance and colonial propaganda. His protests, however, led to renewed confrontations with the British authorities. He was arrested once again and imprisoned. Determined not to submit quietly, Bose launched a hunger strike in jail, which drew wide attention and created political pressure. After 7 days without food and fearing a deterioration in his health that could spark public unrest, the colonial government released him. Though free, Bose's movements were closely monitored. His house in Elgin Road, Calcutta, was placed under constant police surveillance. Realizing that conventional political channels had been exhausted and the British were unlikely to grant independence through negotiation or protest, Bose began to hatch a bold and dangerous plan, an escape from India to seek international support for armed struggle. By the end of 1940, Bose had already reached out through clandestine channels to potential allies abroad, particularly in Germany and Japan. These were countries at war with Britain and might, he believed, be willing to support India's liberation as a way to weaken the British Empire. The British authorities had long considered Bose a political firebrand, but they now saw him as a potential subversive. They placed him under house arrest, hoping to contain his activities. But Subhas Chandra Bose had no intention of remaining passive. What lay ahead was one of the most daring episodes in modern Indian history, a covert escape across enemy lines through Afghanistan and the Soviet Union into the heart of Nazi Germany. From there, he would launch a controversial international campaign to liberate India with the help of Axis powers, a campaign that would etch his name forever into the annals of both admiration and controversy. Part 6. A Revolutionary Abroad, Bose's Secret Escape and the German Mission, 1940–1943. By early 1941, Subhas Chandra Bose had reached a decisive conclusion. Conventional political engagement within India had failed to bring independence any closer. The Second World War, while devastating for Europe, had also exposed vulnerabilities in British imperial power. Bose, under constant surveillance and restricted by the colonial government, began to plot a daring escape that would allow him to reach enemy powers opposed to Britain and seek their support in liberating India. His home in Calcutta had become a prison of sorts. British intelligence monitored his every movement. Public speeches had been curtailed, and his political activities increasingly suppressed. But beneath the still surface of surveillance, Bose was preparing for one of the most audacious journeys in Indian revolutionary history. On the night of 16 January 1941, with the help of his nephew, Dr. Sisir Kumar Bose, he slipped out of his Elgin Road residence disguised as a bearded Pathan. Dressed in long robes and broad pajamas, he wore a black cap to obscure his identity. He avoided eye contact with the British policeman assigned to guard him, feigning muteness to avoid revealing his lack of Pashto. Under cover of night, he was driven to Gomo railway station in present-day Jharkhand, where he boarded a train headed for Peshawar. From Peshawar, the journey became even more perilous. Bose sought the assistance of forward bloc sympathizers and nationalist activists in the northwest frontier province, among them Mian Akbar Shah and Bhagat Ram Talwar. Unknown to Bose, Talwar was a Soviet double agent who worked simultaneously for the British and Soviets, an irony not lost on historians of intelligence operations. Bose's plan was simple in theory but incredibly risky in execution: to cross into Afghanistan, reach the Soviet Union, and from there travel to Nazi Germany, which at the time was at war with Britain. His reasoning was strategic. If Britain's enemies could be persuaded to support India's liberation, it could hasten the collapse of British rule. To reach them, he was willing to gamble everything. From Kabul, Bose adopted another false identity, this time as an Italian nobleman named Count Orlando Mazzotta. Equipped with forged travel documents and guided by his Afghan and Indian contacts, he crossed into Soviet territory in early 1941. Upon arrival in Moscow, he hoped the Soviet regime, with its long-standing ideological opposition to British imperialism, would assist his mission. But he was met with bureaucratic resistance and strategic caution. The Soviets, though hostile to British imperialism, had entered into a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany and were wary of undermining that fragile agreement. As a result, they redirected Bose to the German embassy. There, arrangements were made to fly him to Berlin via a special Luftwaffe aircraft, a testament to the importance Germany now placed on his political potential. In Berlin, Bose was received by senior officials of the Nazi government, including Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop. The Nazi leadership saw Bose as a useful propaganda asset, a charismatic leader who could rally Indian discontent against British colonialism. Although Germany had no strategic interest in directly invading India, the idea of using Bose as a figurehead for an Indian revolutionary movement was appealing. Soon after his arrival, Bose established the Free India Center in Berlin, a propaganda and diplomatic hub that would serve as the headquarters for his activities in Europe. With German support, he also began broadcasting nationalist speeches to India via the Azad Hind radio, speaking in multiple Indian languages to reach as many compatriots as possible. In these addresses, he urged Indians to rise against British rule and offered the vision of a free, self-reliant, and industrialized India. Perhaps his most controversial initiative in Germany was the creation of the Indian Legion, later known as the Indische Legion. Comprising around 500 Indian prisoners of war captured by Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, the Legion was organized as a military unit under the auspices of the German Wehrmacht. The men, most of whom had previously served in the British Indian Army, were offered a chance to fight for Indian independence under Bose's leadership. Members of the Legion swore an oath not just to Bose but also to Adolf Hitler as the commander of the Axis forces. This allegiance later attracted fierce criticism, with many questioning Bose's ethical judgment in aligning with fascist regimes. Yet Bose, ever the pragmatist, saw the alliance as a temporary and necessary evil, a geopolitical partnership forged for the sole purpose of defeating British imperialism. He was clear in his communications that while Nazi Germany might be an ally in war, India's future would not mirror the totalitarian ideologies of its benefactors. He rejected racism, anti-Semitism, and the genocidal doctrines of the Third Reich, even if he did not publicly oppose them during his stay in Berlin. His silence on the Holocaust remains one of the more difficult legacies of his time in Europe. Despite some support, Bose found the Germans lukewarm and unreliable as partners. Hitler, during a meeting with Bose in May 1942, dismissed the feasibility of a military campaign against India. The Nazi leader offered symbolic support but had little strategic interest in Indian affairs. The Eastern Front and the Soviet campaign were draining German resources, and Bose realized that Berlin would not be the launchpad of a revolution in India. Frustrated by Germany's limited commitment, Bose looked east to Japan, which had recently conquered large swaths of Southeast Asia and had a growing presence among Indian expatriates and prisoners of war. Bose began negotiations with German and Japanese officials to secure transport from Europe to Asia. After months of preparation, the plan was finalized. Bose would undertake an unprecedented journey across 2 oceans, from Europe to Southeast Asia, aboard Axis submarines. In February 1943, Bose boarded German U-180, a U-boat that would carry him halfway across the world. Off the coast of Madagascar, in a rare and delicate operation, he transferred mid-sea to a Japanese submarine, the I-29. This transference, involving submarines of 2 enemy navies, was a logistical and political marvel, and a testament to the lengths Bose was willing to go for the cause of Indian independence. By May 1943, Subhas Chandra Bose disembarked in Japanese-controlled Sumatra. He was no longer just a nationalist in exile. He was now the chosen leader of an armed liberation force, with a new theater of operations and new allies. The next phase of his journey leading the Indian National Army, INA, in Japanese-occupied Asia would define both his legacy and his enduring controversy. But even as he left Europe behind, he also left personal sacrifices in his wake. In Berlin, Emily Schenkel, his companion and the mother of his newborn daughter Anita, remained behind. Bose had never publicly acknowledged their union, and his responsibilities to the Indian cause had always taken precedence over personal happiness. It was a farewell without ceremony, conducted in silence, dictated by duty. The revolutionary had crossed oceans and ideologies, navigated betrayal and espionage, and entered into alliances with empires not his own. Now, in Southeast Asia, he would raise an army, declare a provisional government, and lead a march toward India itself undaunted and still utterly convinced that freedom must be seized, not given. Part 7. The Azad Hind Movement and the Indian National Army, 1940–1945. When Subhas Chandra Bose arrived in Japanese-occupied Southeast Asia in May 1943, he was greeted with a hero's welcome. To many in the Indian expatriate communities scattered across Malaya, Burma, and Singapore, Bose was not just a political leader, he was a living symbol of resistance, hope, and the dream of a free India. His reputation had preceded him. The man who had defied the British, challenged Gandhi's dominance in Congress, and journeyed across continents under the most dangerous conditions, was now ready to lead a new front in the freedom struggle. At the heart of this new front was the Indian National Army, INA. Originally conceived by Japanese intelligence officer Major Iwaichi Fujiwara and Indian nationalist Mohan Singh in 1942, the INA consisted of Indian soldiers captured by the Japanese during their campaigns in Southeast Asia, especially after the fall of Singapore. Though the first iteration of the INA had faltered due to internal disagreements and distrust of Japanese intentions, Bose's arrival breathed new life into the project. Under Bose's leadership, the INA was reorganized, restructured, and reinvigorated. He brought with him not only charisma and discipline, but a clear political vision. He declared the formation of the Provisional Government of Free India, Azad Hind, with himself as the head of state, prime minister, and minister of war. This government, although symbolic and lacking territorial control in mainland India, was quickly recognized by several Axis-aligned regimes, including Japan, Germany, Italy, Manchukuo, and the puppet governments of the Philippines and Burma. The INA was now no longer a mere auxiliary force. It became a formal military arm of the Azad Hind government, with Bose as its supreme commander. Perhaps most notably, Bose broke new ground by establishing a women's regiment, the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, commanded by Dr. Lakshmi Swaminathan, later known as Lakshmi Sahgal. This was one of the first female combat units in Asia and a bold statement about gender equality in a nationalist military context. Bose envisioned a nation where women would stand shoulder to shoulder with men, not only in politics and society but also on the battlefield. The INA's base of operations was in Singapore and Rangoon, and it soon swelled to an estimated 40 soldiers, drawn primarily from Indian prisoners of war and expatriates. Financial support came from Indian communities in Southeast Asia, many of whom donated generously in gold, cash, and labor. Bose traveled extensively across Japanese-occupied territories, delivering fiery speeches in Hindi, Tamil, and Bengali, invoking patriotism, sacrifice, and collective responsibility. One of his most famous declarations, "Give me blood and I will give you freedom," became a rallying cry for the movement. By late 1943, Bose and the INA began preparing for a full-scale military campaign. Japanese generals, who had initially been skeptical of Bose's military capabilities, agreed to coordinate operations with the INA as part of their broader campaign in Burma and northeastern India. Bose's plan was clear. The INA, supported by the Japanese Imperial Army, would advance through Burma into northeastern India, liberate territory, and establish a foothold for a future revolt across the subcontinent. The campaign began in earnest in early 1944. INA troops, alongside Japanese forces, crossed into Indian territory and captured the town of Moirang in Manipur. It was here that the tricolor flag of Free India was raised for the first time on Indian soil. The symbolic weight of this moment was immense. It was the closest Bose had come to realizing his vision of an armed liberation of India. But the triumph was short-lived. The INA and Japanese forces encountered fierce resistance from the British Indian Army in the critical battles of Imphal and Kohima, two of the most decisive engagements of the Second World War in the East. The terrain was unforgiving, the supply lines overstretched, and monsoon rains made conditions hellish. Despite initial gains, the joint INA-Japanese forces were eventually driven back. The defeat at Imphal and Kohima marked the beginning of the end for Bose's military campaign. Japanese logistical support dwindled as their empire began to collapse under the Allied counteroffensives. With the loss of strategic initiative, the INA was forced into a long and painful retreat across Burma. Morale began to deteriorate. Casualties mounted. Disease spread rapidly, and desertions increased. Despite the hardships, Bose remained with his troops, traveling through the Burmese jungles, urging them to hold fast to their ideals. To the end, he believed that the INA's actions, regardless of military outcome, would inspire Indians back home and shake the British grip on the subcontinent. He was not entirely wrong. Meanwhile, in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which had been captured by the Japanese, Bose declared the islands as territories under the jurisdiction of the Azad Hind government and renamed them Shahid, Martyr, and Swaraj, Independence. Yet, he was never granted full control by the Japanese military. His only visit to the islands in 1944 was tightly controlled. Unbeknownst to him, local Indian leaders like Diwan Singh had been tortured and killed by the Japanese, and any attempt by locals to inform Bose of the atrocities was swiftly silenced. Despite his efforts, the INA's role remained largely symbolic in military terms. However, its psychological and political impact was far-reaching. Inside India, news of Indians fighting against the British, even in alliance with Japan, stirred both admiration and controversy. To the British, the INA was a traitorous collaborationist force. To many Indians, it was a brave attempt to break the shackles of empire through sheer will. In one of his final public broadcasts, made from Singapore in July 1944, Bose addressed Mahatma Gandhi as the father of the nation and asked for his blessings in the fight against the British. This gesture was remarkable, given their previous political divergence, and signaled Bose's desire to unify all Indians in the final phase of the freedom struggle. It was also the first time Gandhi had been referred to by that now iconic title. But the tide of war was turning irrevocably. By early 1945, the British had retaken Rangoon. Japan's defeat loomed. Bose and the remnants of the INA retreated further south. Bose hoped to make contact with the Soviet Union in the final months of the war, believing that Stalin's regime hostile to Western imperialism might offer support for India's cause in the post-war order. He planned to travel to Manchukuo in northeastern China, then under Japanese control, and from there make his way to the Soviet Union. It was a desperate gamble. But for Bose, who had crossed continents and empires in pursuit of freedom, no path was too perilous. On 17 August 1945, just days after Japan's surrender, Subhas Chandra Bose boarded a Japanese aircraft from Saigon to Mukden, modern-day Shenyang. The flight never reached its final destination. The next day, 18 August 1945, near Taihoku Airport in Japanese-controlled Taiwan, the plane crashed during takeoff. Bose, severely burned in the crash, died later that evening in a military hospital. He was 48 years old. His body was cremated, and his ashes were eventually taken to Japan, where they remain preserved at the Renkoji Temple in Tokyo. But his death sparked disbelief across India. Many refused to accept the official version. Rumors of his survival circulated for decades. Some believed he had escaped to the Soviet Union, others that he would one day return to lead India. Yet even in death, Bose's legacy endured. The Indian National Army was militarily defeated, but the soldiers who had followed Bose were viewed with admiration by many. Their trials for treason upon return to India sparked public outrage and united factions of Indian society across ideological lines. The INA had become a symbol of sacrifice and, in a strange turn of history, helped quicken the end of the British Empire in India. Subhas Chandra Bose had staked everything: his health, relationships, political alliances, and ultimately his life for the dream of Indian independence. And though that independence would come 2 years after his death, many would say it arrived carrying echoes of his voice. Part 8. Death, Disbelief, and the Seeds of a Controversial Legacy. 1945, 1947, and beyond. The death of Subhas Chandra Bose on 18 August 1945 sent shockwaves across the Indian subcontinent. Official reports from Japanese authorities stated that he had succumbed to third-degree burns following a plane crash at Taihoku, present-day Taipei, Taiwan. Bose, who had survived brutal imprisonments, navigated secret journeys across continents, and raised an army in exile, had died in what seemed an ordinary and tragic accident. But for millions of Indians, this abrupt and unverified end was not just implausible, it was unacceptable. The narrative of his death, despite being corroborated by Japanese doctors, military personnel, and even INA members, was immediately met with widespread disbelief. The idea that Netaji, a man revered for his courage, shrewdness, and almost mythic resilience, could perish in such mundane circumstances clashed with the heroic image he had carved in the national imagination. The trauma of his followers, particularly those in Bengal, was compounded by the suddenness of the announcement and the absence of his body. A vacuum was left behind, quickly filled by rumors, conspiracy theories, and contested truths. From the moment the news reached India, people began to speculate that Bose had survived and was perhaps lying low, planning his next revolutionary move. Some suggested he had escaped to the Soviet Union and was biding his time. Others believed he had gone into hiding to avoid British retribution. For decades, these rumors persisted, fueled by the mystery surrounding his cremation in Japan, the Japanese government's delayed disclosures, and political interests within post-independence India. While investigations and inquiries were launched over the years, including the Shah Nawaz Committee, 1956, the Khosla Commission, 1970, and the Mukherjee Commission, 2005, none could definitively quell public speculation. Though these committees concluded that Bose had likely died in the crash, many remained unconvinced. The ashes, preserved in Tokyo's Renkoji Temple, believed by some to be his, became the focus of diplomatic discussions. India's government, wary of controversy, refrained for decades from formally requesting their repatriation. Despite this ambiguity, Bose's legacy was quickly absorbed into the symbolic vocabulary of Indian nationalism. While the Indian National Congress had often distanced itself from his militant methods and ideological extremities during his lifetime, posthumous recognition of his contributions became politically and culturally inevitable. Even Mahatma Gandhi, who had long disagreed with Bose's approach, acknowledged his sacrifice in a letter written shortly after the war. Subhas Bose has died well. He was undoubtedly a patriot, though misguided. Bose's impact on British rule was more psychological than military. The Indian National Army, despite suffering defeat, had created a crisis of loyalty within the British Indian Armed Forces. During the INA trials held in 1945–46 at the Red Fort in Delhi, the British charged several INA officers with treason. These trials backfired spectacularly. Massive public protests erupted across India, cutting across regional, religious, and class lines. For the first time, soldiers in the Royal Indian Navy and sections of the British Indian Army mutinied, signaling an unprecedented breakdown of colonial authority. The British administration, rattled by this wave of unrest, recognized the looming threat of a national uprising. Combined with Britain's post-war exhaustion and growing international pressure to decolonize, these developments accelerated the countdown to independence. Clement Attlee, the British Prime Minister who would eventually oversee the withdrawal from India, later remarked that Bose's activities and the INA's impact on Indian troops played a role in convincing British officials that their time in India was over. In this way, Bose's legacy, though fraught with contradictions, was instrumental in pushing the British Empire closer to collapse. He may not have achieved military victory, but he succeeded in undermining the moral and structural foundations of colonial rule. His alliance with Axis powers remained controversial, but even his harshest critics conceded that his intentions were patriotic and his commitment absolute. After independence, the Indian state cautiously integrated Bose's memory into its official history. Monuments were built. Roads, stadiums, universities, and public buildings were named after him. The airport in Kolkata, the city of his birth, was rechristened as Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose International Airport. His birthday, 23 January, began to be commemorated across India, and in 2021, the government of India declared it Parakram Diwas, Day of Valor, a national day of observance. Yet Bose's legacy has always been interpreted through the lens of ideology. For the political left, he was a revolutionary with a socialist vision of an egalitarian India. For the right, he became a nationalist icon who challenged Gandhi and Nehru's dominance and pursued independence through force. This ideological flexibility, combined with the enduring mystery of his death, made him a compelling figure for various political movements, particularly in Bengal, where his name evokes deep emotional resonance. In the decades that followed, films, books, documentaries, and dramatizations continued to revive interest in his life. Notable portrayals, such as Shyam Benegal's 2004 Biopic Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, The Forgotten Hero, and Rajkumar Rao's web series Bose, Dead, Alive, 2017, introduced new generations to his complex story. Academic studies, including Sugata Bose's His Majesty's Opponent, explored his ideology, motivations, and historical context with greater nuance. Public fascination with Bose also generated a subculture of conspiracies. Stories of a mysterious monk in Uttar Pradesh known as Gumnami Baba, rumored by some to be Bose living in secrecy, caught national attention. Others speculated that he was held in a Soviet gulag, his fate hidden for geopolitical reasons. These theories, while never conclusively proven, reflect the unique position Bose occupies in Indian historical memory, not just as a figure of the past, but as a symbol of what might have been. What makes Bose so enduringly fascinating is not merely his life or death, but his refusal to conform to any singular ideological or political narrative. He defied the British, challenged Gandhi, rejected compromise, and embraced unlikely alliances, all in the name of one overarching goal: the complete and immediate independence of India. His methods were unorthodox. His rhetoric, unapologetically militant. His personality, a combination of spiritual introspection and political ferocity. To some, he was a nationalist hero who sacrificed everything for his motherland. To others, he was a misguided revolutionary whose tactics, including alliances with fascist regimes, betrayed democratic values. Still, for many Indians, Subhas Chandra Bose represents a bold, uncompromising vision of freedom, one that was not content to wait for independence, but determined to seize it, even at great personal cost. Even today, the image of Netaji clad in military uniform, cap in place, and eyes fixed on the horizon stands as a reminder of a freedom movement that was as much about courage and confrontation as it was about patience and negotiation. His legacy, like his death, may never be fully settled, but it remains vital, contested, and profoundly inspiring. Part 9. Ideology, Legacy, and the echoes of a revolutionary. Subhas Chandra Bose's legacy is unlike that of any other figure in India's long struggle for independence. While Mahatma Gandhi remains the symbol of nonviolent resistance and Jawaharlal Nehru, the architect of modern India's democratic institutions, Bose stands alone as the militant visionary who dared to seek freedom through fire and steel. His ideology was complex, a unique synthesis of nationalism, socialism, authoritarianism, and deeply held spiritual convictions. These overlapping ideas, though sometimes contradictory, reflected Bose's relentless drive to free his country and build it anew. At the ideological core of Bose's vision was his belief that India's independence must be achieved through uncompromising struggle. Unlike the constitutionalists in the Congress Party who favored gradual reform, Bose saw British rule as illegitimate and believed that only armed revolt could dislodge it. He frequently drew inspiration from global anti-colonial movements and revolutionary thinkers, advocating the use of all available means, diplomatic, military, and psychological, to overthrow imperial power. He saw himself as part of a global awakening against colonialism. His admiration for leaders like Mustafa Kemal Ataturk of Turkey and Vladimir Lenin was evident in his speeches and writings. Both had overthrown old regimes and built new national orders through decisive and often authoritarian means. Bose envisioned a similar transformation for India. Independence would be only the first step. What was needed afterward was national reconstruction, radical land reforms, industrialization, and the establishment of a welfare state that could eradicate poverty and inequality. Though often accused of being a fascist due to his alliances with Axis powers, Bose consistently resisted being defined by European ideologies. He described his approach as one that combined the discipline and order of fascism with the egalitarianism of socialism. He rejected racism and caste discrimination and strongly supported gender equality, seen most prominently in the formation of the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, one of the world's first all-female combat units. In contrast to the racial hierarchies of his German and Japanese allies, Bose insisted that India's struggle was one of human dignity, spiritual unity, and cultural pride. Religion, in Bose's worldview, was deeply personal but also foundational to Indian identity. He drew heavily from the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, especially the idea of spiritual nationalism. For Bose, the Bhagavad Gita was not merely a religious text, but a call to action. It taught the ethics of selfless duty and the importance of sacrifice principles he carried with him throughout his political life. Yet, he was also a staunch secularist in his politics. He envisioned a pluralistic India where people of all faiths could coexist, and he spoke often of the importance of harmony between Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and others in the national movement. One of the more troubling aspects of Bose's legacy is his time in Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. While he condemned Nazi racial theories early on, he later made few public criticisms of Germany's anti-Semitic policies. His article in the Nazi publication Angriff, which claimed Indians were true Aryans, and suggested ideological kinship between India and Germany, continues to raise ethical questions. Historians, such as Romain Hayes, have pointed out that Bose never expressed moral outrage at the atrocities of the Holocaust, despite being in Berlin when many of them were occurring. Whether this silence was due to political pragmatism or ideological indifference remains debated. Bose's opposition to providing asylum to Jewish refugees in India before and during the war further complicates his image. At a time when members of the Indian National Congress had spoken against Nazi persecution, Bose took a contrary position, suggesting that Jews had historically sided with imperial powers. These views, though not central to his public politics, cast a shadow over his time in Europe and remain a source of discomfort for many of his admirers. Nevertheless, Bose's strategic intent was always clear: defeat British colonialism at any cost. He viewed the Axis powers as temporary and necessary allies, means to an end, rather than ideological partners. His actions, controversial as they were, stemmed from his conviction that British rule could not be ended through negotiation alone. After his death, the memory of Bose was absorbed and reshaped by many currents within Indian politics. The Indian National Congress, wary of his militant past and fascist associations, praised his patriotism while marginalizing his ideological contributions. Meanwhile, regional and ideological groups, especially in Bengal and among the political right, elevated him to a near mythical status. The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, and other Hindu nationalist organizations often invoke Bose as a nationalist alternative to Gandhi, despite Bose's secular and inclusive ideology. Today, Bose is commemorated across India in monuments, institutions, and cultural narratives. His face appears on postage stamps. His name adorns airports, bridges, stadiums, and roads. The INA slogan Jai Hind is now a ubiquitous national salute. The annual celebration of his birth anniversary on 23 January, now officially recognized as Parakram Diwas, reflects the government's acknowledgement of his lasting influence. Yet the full breadth of Bose's legacy remains complex. He represents the unresolved tensions within the freedom movement, between moderation and militancy, between idealism and pragmatism, between Gandhi's ethics and Bose's strategy. He was a nationalist who embraced internationalism, a revolutionary who sought order, a visionary who remained grounded in the past. His life forces Indians to grapple with questions that remain relevant even decades after independence. What is the price of freedom? Can moral compromise ever be justified for national liberation? Is authoritarianism ever compatible with democracy in post-colonial states? Bose's life does not provide easy answers, but it challenges simplistic narratives. His commitment was absolute, his courage undeniable, and his sacrifice immense. Even those who question his methods often concede that his passion for India was unmatched. He dreamed not just of freedom from British rule, but of a powerful, self-reliant, and just India, an India that could stand tall among the nations of the world. In the final analysis, Subhas Chandra Bose remains one of India's most enigmatic and compelling leaders. He was not perfect, but he was relentless. Not universally accepted, but widely revered. Not victorious in battle, but triumphant in memory. His legacy is not just in what he achieved, but in the unyielding spirit he embodied, a spirit that continues to inspire, challenge, and provoke generations of Indians to this day.